Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated legal notice. All content shared, displayed, or otherwise presented during this meeting, including but not limited to sorority manuals, ceremonial rituals, and other materials that contain Delta's trademarks, copyrights, or any other intellectual property, is owned and controlled by Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and is protected by law. Participants shall not photograph, video record, screen capture, or otherwise copy Delta materials to modify or reproduce for personal or third-party use. Participant further understands, agrees, and acknowledges to be solely liable for any damages in law or in equity resulting from violation of applicable laws and shall be subject to disciplinary action according to the Member Code of Conduct and any other related agreement. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Power to Choose, Making Your Medical Wishes Known. I am Tiffany Taylor Lee, the president of the Bay Area Houston Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to tonight's webinar. Thank you for joining us as we engage in this important conversation about understanding, and communicating your medical wishes. Planning for future healthcare decisions is one of the most meaningful ways we can advocate for ourselves and support our loved ones during these critical moments. We were founded in 2005. Our award-winning chapter proudly serves the communities of Clear Lake, Friendswood, Pearland, Pasadena, Seabrook, and Webster. Through service, sisterhood, scholarship, and social action, our chapter remains committed to addressing the needs of the communities we serve through impactful programs and initiatives. Tonight's webinar reflects our commitment to the 5-point programmatic thrust of our beloved sorority, with special emphasis on physical and mental health, while also advancing economic development, educational development, political awareness and involvement, and international awareness and involvement. At the Bay Area Houston Alumni Chapter, we believe informed communities are empowered communities. Conversations about advanced care planning and making your healthcare wishes known may not always be easy, but they are necessary. Having these discussions tonight can provide you clarity, peace of mind, and confidence for tomorrow. We encourage you to stay engaged throughout this webinar, ask questions, and take full advantage of the information and resources that will be shared. Thank you again for being with us tonight and for prioritizing your health and well-being. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Diana Bowers, who will guide you through tonight's webinar, The Power to Choose, Making Your Medical Wishes Known.
Thank you, President Taylor Lee. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. My name is Diana Bowers, and I'm proud to be a member of the D.E.A.R.S, a group of women aged 62 and older who represent the older American demographics within our Delta membership. Like many of you, we are parents, spouses, siblings, grandparents, students, everyday individuals, retirees, and caregivers who are deeply concerned about the health and legal well-being of our loved ones. We wanted to find the most effective way to share important information with our community. And our research shows that 43% of viewers obtain factual information from podcasts. This evening, our guest hosts will impart their medical and legal expertise. And over the next hour, our guest hosts aim to navigate the complex medical and legal landscape, equipping you with the knowledge and confidence needed to advocate for yourselves and your families while making informed healthcare decisions. We encourage you to settle in, relax, and pay attention to the resources and links that will be shared in the Q&A chat and at the end of the presentation. A little housekeeping. The Facebook chat is disabled. However, we invite you to register via the QR code on the Facebook page to join the webinar to ask your question. Now, in the QA chat, we want to know where you're listening from. So drop in the chat where you're listening from. Our chapter is located in Houston, Texas. Now, what you all been waiting for, and without delay, let's introduce tonight's speakers, who will be presented by one of our Delta Dears, Ms. Brenda Webb Powell. Brenda?
Muted.
I am humbled and truly delighted to introduce our guest speakers, two brilliant professionals I've known for all of their lives. They are the dynamic sister team behind the Powell Power Hour podcast. Dr. Adrianne Powell, a compassionate board-certified internal medicine physician with over 20 years of experience, and attorney Apriel Powell, Juris Doctor, a seasonal healthcare attorney who is an active community educator on healthcare planning for older adults in the Houston, Texas area. Their mission is simple but powerful: increase health literacy, strengthen advocacy, and help every person understand the choices that shapes their health and their future. And it fills my heart to say, these remarkable women are also my daughters. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Powell and Attorney Powell.
But first, the disclaimer for Powell Power Hour. The information provided on this webinar is for general purposes and educational purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or legal counsel. Although we are a licensed physician and licensed attorney in the state of Texas, we are not providing personalized medical or legal advice to any listener. Listening to this webinar does not create a doctor-patient or attorney-client relationship. You should always consult with your own healthcare provider or legal advisor regarding any questions or concerns specific to your health, legal rights, or circumstances. Lastly, the views expressed on this webinar are our own and do not represent the views of any institution or organization with which we are affiliated. Thank you.
Good evening again and welcome. I am Dr. Adrianne Powell. Yes, the same doctor on the flyer. I just have some wisdom highlights. And I am the medical half of Powell Power Hour, and we're honored to be invited to share our expertise. We enjoy educating on this topic because it sits at the intersection of our passions: health, community, empowerment, and advocacy. We're here because studies show that Black Americans are significantly less likely to complete advanced directives when compared to other populations. And as a result, both my sister and I have seen families face unnecessary confusion, conflict, stress, delays in treatment, and uncertainty during some of life's most difficult medical moments. The reasons for such a divide in health literacy are wide. We know our communities have experienced a long history of medical racism and healthcare disparities. That history has understandably created mistrust about completing even important healthcare documents. In addition, culturally, we tend to verbally share our wishes with family members instead of using legal documents. And our faith plays a large role in medical decision making, and that can sometimes make planning in advance for care seem like a lack of faith. But at the end of the day, decisions must be made. And many times, loved ones may be forced to make difficult decisions during moments of crisis. What's even more uncomfortable is having your care directed by a healthcare system and default decision-making processes rather than your own preferences. Powell Power Hour is sensitive to our unique situations for no one has framed the conversation in a manner that's understandable to us. But tonight is about changing that. Next slide, please. One of the biggest misconceptions about advanced care planning is that it's only for older adults. Many people hear this topic and immediately think, I'm too young for that. I don't need those forms yet, or I really don't have any issues. But here's what I tell my patients. Advanced directives aren't about how old you are. They are instructors to doctors, families, and people you trust about what type of medical care you want in instances when you can't communicate it yourself. A medical crisis can happen at any time to anyone. There are various situations listed here. My line sister actually pointed out that obstetric complications should also be included on this slide, especially given Black maternal mortality. Catastrophic events don't discriminate. Moreover, advanced care planning is not just about preparing for death. It's making your wishes known before a crisis and protecting your family from stressful uncertainty. So think about discussing this with your older parents, your siblings, your spouse, your adult children, including those newly minted adult college students. If you're over 18, you're a candidate to have these documents in place. Next slide, please. So here are our objectives. Tonight, we're not just talking about paperwork. Before you leave this evening, we expect you to understand common medical terminology on the forms,
We want to make sure you understand the 5 major Texas Advanced Directive forms.
know when each form becomes active,
Want to make sure you know who can make those medical decisions for you.
understand what happens if you do nothing.
And most importantly, when we finish today, we hope you leave with a practical action plan.
So, before we talk about the legal forms, we need to talk about the medical language. One of the hardest things that I've seen as a physician is families being asked to make major decisions while hearing words they've never heard before. And when emotions are high, medical terminology can feel overwhelming. So, I'm going to break this down into decision-making terms, medical treatment terms, and end-of-life terms. Next slide, please. First, let's talk about capacity and incapacity, and these are easy ones. These are medical terms that we actually document in your medical record. Capacity simply means that a person can understand information, appreciate the consequences of their decision, and communicate their wishes. In other words, for example, the doctor explains you have a clogged artery, the suggested treatment is a stent. You understand the consequences of your decision to get the stent or not, and you can communicate this. Then you have capacity. Key point here is that if English is not your primary language, then you have the right to receive hospital provided, qualified, free interpreter services. I've used Igbo, Arabic, Spanish in the past, so they're wide. Furthermore, utilizing an official interpreter is a medical best practice. So please don't be offended if an organization requires one to ensure accurate communication. Incapacity, on the other hand, is the opposite. It means a person can no longer understand information or communicate healthcare decisions. As an example, you have burns all over your body and you're in a medically induced coma. You can't comprehend nor talk. Then you're considered to be incapacitated, and that's when we refer to your documents that Attorney Powell is going to explain here in a bit. Next slide, please. One other thing I meant to mention is that as physicians, we assess capacity every day through our conversations with patients. And so if there's a concern that someone may not fully understand their medical decision or their situation, then we can perform a more formal evaluation and use standardized tools as needed. But the goal is to make sure that patients are truly able to understand their options and communicate their wishes. So these are some other medical terms that are in the legal forms, and they describe various treatments we use to keep a person alive as a bridge to recovery. Key point, that's a bridge to recovery. So ventilators, those are machines that breathe for a person who can't breathe independently on their own. Again, this is a bridge to recovery and not intended to be a long-term treatment, although there are certain rare conditions for which long-term ventilation is considered medically appropriate. So when contemplating your decision about this, I recommend you think about it as, is this temporary or is my breathing ability expected to recover? With artificial nutrition, it's basically food delivered through a feeding tube, which is threaded through the nose or surgically placed in the stomach. Now, this is big in our culture because we think of food as a basic act of love. But in certain cases, tube feeding does not extend life nor reduce suffering. And in advanced diseases, the brain may sometimes stop sending hunger signals. So, something to ask the doctor is, will this feeding tube actually help me to recover? Or what has to happen for this to be removed? Next slide. So, CPR. These are other terms that are listed in the medical documents when we activate what happens when the heart stops beating or when it has a chaotic rhythm. When that happens, you are said to be under a cardiac arrest. And when this happens, blood can't circulate to the brain or other vital organs. And we can detect this when we don't feel a pulse. And if the brain doesn't get oxygenated blood, then that can lead to permanent brain damage. Cardiac arrests can be caused by heart attacks, abnormalities in blood chemistry due to malnutrition or medicines, blood clots to the lungs, which is a common cause in cancer, and conditions that cause low blood pressure like sepsis. Some key points about CPR is that it is meant to be a temporary bridge to advanced treatment. So, after we aggressively press on the chest in effort to manually circulate the blood, we're getting a big ventilator, a defibrillator, we're putting IVs in. It is a bridge to more advanced treatment. And it's also not meant to jumpstart the heart. On TV, you can see some people get CPR, wake up, sit up, and talk and go home. But in reality, according to the American Heart Association, when CPR occurs outside of a hospital setting, the survival rate is 10 to 20% or even lower for the elderly and frail. Defibrillation is when we use a device to deliver an electric shock through the skin to the heart to try to change a chaotic rhythm to a normal heart rhythm. This is the dramatic clear moment that you see on TV. It's not used for every cardiac arrest because, again, it can't jumpstart the heart like a flat line, but it is a key part of many resuscitation efforts. Sometimes these shocks can cause burns. I've had patients report persistent burning of the chest wall, kind of like a sunburn, that can last up to 5 days, something to consider. And finally, transcutaneous pacing. Again, I'm mentioning this because it's on the forms. This is when the heart rate drops dangerously low and doesn't respond to medicine, so you need a permanent pacemaker. And so transcutaneous pacing is a short bridge to a more permanent pacemaker. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about some end of life terms. You know, in medicine, we often focus on what we can do to keep the body alive, but advanced care planning asks a different question. What outcomes would be acceptable to you? And to answer that question, we need to talk about severity of illness and states of consciousness and what matters most to each person. So, on the forms that we're discussing tonight, there's going to be two important medical terms to describe the serious illness, either a terminal illness or an irreversible condition. And understanding the difference between them can help you to make a more informed decision about the care you would want for yourself or what you would want your loved one to have. In a terminal illness, it means that the person has a disease or condition that medicine cannot cure, and despite treatment, doctors expect it will likely result in death within the next 6 months. Some examples are cancers that have metastasized or are unresponsive to curative treatments, or late end-stage organ failure like heart failure when the heart doesn't respond to medicines. This does not mean immediate death, and treatments during terminal illnesses are generally focused on comfort rather than care. An irreversible condition is also a serious illness or injury that medicine can sometimes treat, but it can't cure. The difference here is that the person is not expected to regain the ability to make decisions nor care for themselves, and they depend on life sustaining treatments to stay alive. Another difference here is that they may live for months or even years with those treatments, but again, they're not expected to recover, to make decisions, nor care for themselves. And we see this with severe brain dysfunction. Next slide, please. So we've talked about treatments that may extend life in critical moments. And now let's shift our focus to something only you can define, and that is what is going to make life meaningful and what quality of life would be acceptable to you. For some people, a meaningful quality of life means recognizing and interacting with loved ones, being able to communicate, living independently, participating in family, faith, and community life. But for others, it may look different. People may choose to continue life sustaining treatments when there's no chance for meaningful recovery for religious reasons, organ donation, or giving family time for emotional processing or time to travel to be at their side. So the important question is what's going to be acceptable to you? With brain death, it's not a coma, it's not a vegetative state, and it's not something that a person recovers from. It is complete and irreversible loss of all brain function. And medically and legally, the person has died. Machines may temporarily keep the heart beating and the lungs moving, which can be very confusing to families, but it's important to understand that brain death is irreversible. A coma, on the other hand, is different. A person in a coma is unconscious, they can't be awakened, but the brain is still alive. It sometimes is a temporary condition that can last days to weeks, and the patient may actually recover. They could remain severely impaired, or it could progress to a persistent vegetative state. Now, that's one of the most difficult conditions for families to understand. A person in a persistent vegetative state may appear awake, their eyes open, they may seem to sleep and wake throughout the day, and they may even breathe on their own. But despite these outward signs, they're not aware of themselves or people around them. They can't think, they can't communicate, they can't recognize loved ones, and they cannot meaningfully interact with the world. And so, why does this matter? These terms here, they're not decisions, but they are diagnoses, and the diagnoses and the decisions come afterward. So once we get here, then we make decisions about advanced medical treatment. If your loved one is here and their heart stops, would you want to attempt CPR? If you're here and you stop breathing, do you want to be placed on a ventilator? We're asking our loved ones and ourselves, what do you consider an acceptable quality of life? And for some people, after considering these possibilities, they may decide they don't want resuscitation after their heart stops. And that's where a do not resuscitate order comes in. A DNR is a decision to stop care. I want to be very clear. It's not about stopping medical treatment. It's about not wanting a specific type of care should your heart stop. There's still a doctor, there's still medicines, there's still treatment. And these conversations can feel heavy, but they're rooted in love. They're about creating clarity and reducing stress for your family and making sure that your wishes are honored. So now let's talk about the practical tools that make this possible. And I'm going to turn it over to my big sister as she breaks down the forms.
Big sister, huh? Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Powell. Just a quick thank you again to everyone who's on tonight, all 140 on the webinar and those on Facebook. I will tell you that this is the type of community engagement and outreach that my sister and I envisioned for Powell Power Hour when we started during COVID. So thank you again. I am Apriel Powell, happy to be here. So now that you've heard from the good doctor about the various conditions and treatment options to discuss with your own doctor, it's time to put that knowledge to work by seriously contemplating and planning and completing an advance directive or more than one advance directive. Now, the term advance directive is the umbrella term for many types of future planning documents here in Texas. And while this presentation has a Texas slant to it, the general concepts, particularly and especially with respect to the clinical information Dr. Powell just went over, those will apply across jurisdictions. So with that, I'm going to cover the medical power of attorney. You'll also hear me abbreviate MPOA. We'll talk about the directive to physicians and family or surrogates, also known as the living will. We are also going to look at the statutory durable power of attorney. We'll look at that very briefly, and you'll understand why when we get to that form. We'll take a look at another form, the out of hospital do not resuscitate, or DNR, which we heard a little bit about earlier. And we'll compare that with an inpatient DNR process. Then lastly, as far as advanced directives go, we'll look at a mental health declaration form. And that's one of the newer forms here in Texas with a very important nuance. Now, I can tell you from my work as being a hospital attorney that the medical power of attorney and the living will are very frequently confused with one another, as well as with the statutory durable power of attorney. So hopefully tonight we will clear all that up for you. And as a bonus, we are going to take a look at the quick look at the HIPAA release form, something I'm pretty sure most of you have filled out and have seen before. And I just want to compare and contrast that form with the advanced directives. Next slide, please. So the first form, the medical power of attorney, what is it? Well, a medical power of attorney is the document through which you, as the principal, also at the time would be the patient, when you designate someone who's called your agent to make medical decisions on your behalf if you become unable to do so yourself. Now, again, in states outside of Texas, I'm not sure where other jurisdictions are on here, but in your jurisdiction, the medical power of attorney may be called a healthcare proxy, or the form itself actually may be called a healthcare proxy form. And we'll talk more about that a little later after the presentation. Next slide, please. So let's walk through some key elements of the medical power of attorney form. At the very top of the form, obviously, as you would expect, you provide your name, and that's also where you designate your agent, along with their name, their address, and their phone number. Now, take note that the agent does not sign on this form, okay? So the medical power of attorney, also there in the first section, is activated only when your physician certifies that you are no longer able to make your own healthcare decisions. So that's your physician, not your well-meaning relative, or maybe your not so well-meaning relative, but your physician has to certify and make that medical call. The form also allows you to write in specific limitations that you want your agent's authority to have. So for example, if you have a particular condition, we've heard about some from my sister earlier, you may want to restrict your agent's decision-making authority with respect to that particular condition. You may want to list also, there's an opportunity here, I have starred, to list a first alternate agent and a second alternate agent in order of priority so they don't act together. And that is in the event the primary agent that you have at the top of the form is unavailable or unwilling or no longer with us. And so you can have alternate agents make the decisions that you've discussed with them on your behalf. There's also a place to document where copies of the form are to be completed and kept. And by the way, speaking of copies, please make sure that all of your advanced directives, once completed, that they are shared with the appropriate persons, particularly the agents. Share with your physicians, upload your documents into your patient portal, or bring them with you if you are admitted to the hospital or if you have a hospital procedure planned. Whatever you do, please do not keep them in a safe deposit box where no one can find them. Another principle worth highlighting found in the disclosure statement, and that's on to the right on the second page of the document, is this: your agent speaks for you to carry out your wishes. It is what I like to say, your voice and not your agent's choice. So the form also here again reiterates that the agent's authority is triggered only when you are deemed unable to make your own healthcare decisions. Now, the person you select should obviously be someone that you know, someone that you trust, and again, someone that you have this discussion with that will take care of your medical wishes. Next slide, please. To make this form official, the medical power of attorney must either be notarized or signed by two witnesses. So, one very important limitation to note with respect to the witnesses, one of them cannot be a blood relative or a spouse of the principal or the patient, and can't be someone who would inherit property, either personal or real property from the person's estate. So that means even if someone is not related to you and they're in your will or otherwise stand to receive any portion of your property, they can't serve as a witness. So let's think about that. Write in the chat. This is interactive chat time, or in the Q&A, I should say. Type why you think this is the rationale for that witness limitation. So why are witnesses held to that standard? Next slide, please. The next advance directive that we're going to discuss is the living will, or the directive to physician and family or surrogates. This one is a little bit different. Again, it's called the living will, and this is a form you'll want to complete in consultation with your physician because it instructs your family, your surrogates, which also may be your MPOA agent, and it also instructs the physician on what to do if you cannot speak for yourself. So you're already seeing the difference between the who is named in the medical power of attorney and now the what they should be doing in this living will. Now, the key difference here again designates the MPOA designates who. I'm repeating myself. So, but I do want to say same philosophy, your voice, not another person's choice. So I'll pause here and invite Dr. Powell to weigh in. Is it part of your practice to help your patients complete these forms?
Absolutely. Especially during the Medicare annual wellness visit, that is a part of some of the multiple questions we ask about someone's social situation and other plans for advanced care that we discussed during that appointment.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at these forms. The important, again, distinction is the living will is triggered only when you become a, quote, qualified patient under Texas law. So now we have to think about that. That means that you've been diagnosed with a terminal condition or an irreversible condition, and you are unable to make your own decisions. So we talked about those definitions earlier. Let's dive in. So, for both a terminal and irreversible condition, you'll see on the form here on the left, the form allows you to indicate whether you want all treatments other than comfort care to be withheld or discontinued, or whether you want to be kept alive in that condition, that irreversible condition, or in that terminal condition. On the second page of the form, which is on the right, it provides space for additional free-form instructions about your care as the qualified patient, again, been diagnosed as one of those two things. And we'll look at some example language later that may go there. Page 3 is especially important. If you don't have an MPOA, the living will lets you name someone to make your decisions based on what you've documented. However, if you already have a medical power of attorney, and I'm sorry, we're actually on the same page here. If you already have a medical power of attorney, please hear me. The living will, if you don't have a medical power of attorney, I'm sorry, the living will lets you name someone to make decisions, again, based on what you have documented here. However, if you already have a medical power of attorney, you already have an agent that has filled out the other form we discussed, do not name a different person on this form. That will create confusion and it can delay care. So where a medical power of attorney already exists, the living will control the specific decisions because it is more specific than the MPOA, provided that the person is the same. I hope that makes sense. We can come back to that later. So the same witness rule here applies. There's a notary is an option, but the same witness limitations of not being related by blood or marriage or having being an heir to an estate. Next slide, please. And this again just shows the witness and notary options. Next slide, please. So here are some examples. We talked about that free form area on the living will where you can be more specific, again, because the living will is about instructions. So, again, the point of this form is that you've been diagnosed with either a terminal or irreversible condition. You may have watched a loved one on a feeding tube. We discussed that. And you have very strong feelings that you may write in that section. Well, if I'm ever in a persistent vegetative state for more than X amount of days, I want my feeding tube discontinued. Okay, you have the right to do that. And the agent has to comply with that. Or it can be very treatment specific there. You can say that you don't ever want a tracheostomy under any circumstances. And again, the agent has to comply with that. Next slide, please. So to summarize what we already have, the medical power of attorney designates who has broad decision-making authority. Remember, there wasn't a lot of space to be specific on that form. And the living will documents what those decisions should be, again, for a, quote, qualified patient. If there is ever a conflict, the living will takes precedence because its instructions are specific. All right, next slide, please. Wait a minute, you see the doctor's hand raised there. Can a living will be overridden? Yes. In Texas, a directive to physicians or living will can be overridden. Texas law allows a physician or hospital ethics committee to decline to follow your directive if, number one, the treatment is medically inappropriate or futile. If you have stomach cancer and you cannot withstand a feeding tube, however you have that you want a feeding tube as treatment on your living will, then that is futile. And so that can be overwritten because it's not medically appropriate. Also in Texas, if you are pregnant, if the patient is pregnant, Texas is the state that allows for the care of the child. And so whatever you may have in conflict written down on your living will that is in conflict with that very controversial Texas law could be overwritten. And that was one that I would say that I would get my ethics committee involved at the hospital. Obviously, if the directive is not properly executed, then you can't, if it's not signed or I've been called to make sure that the documents are valid, then it can be overwritten. Now, what's interesting is a patient can verbally revoke their living will, even if they've been certified unable to make their own medical decisions. Let's pause there. They can revoke a living will even if they've been certified unable to make their own medical decisions. Why is that? That is because Texas has what's called the principle of absolute patient autonomy. By the way, the same rule applies for the medical power of attorney. All right, next slide, please. So you have to be next slide. You have to be of sound mind, but to make the directive, but you can be of incapacitated when you revoke it. All right. So let's look at this form and let's look at the two pictures here with brother and sister. All right, at mom's bedside. Everybody quietly say this to themselves as I read this: statutory, durable power of attorney. Notice that nothing in the title even hints at a healthcare decision-making authority. And that's because it doesn't give anyone the authority to make healthcare decisions. Again, notice the brother and sister here at mom's bedside. Next slide, please. So this form grants authority to make financial decisions for the principal. You'll see different options of financial oversight and authority enumerated at the bottom on page 1 and then again at the top of page 2. And this can be made effective immediately. This does not necessarily have to be triggered by mental incapacity. There it is in black and white, all caps, third sentence there at the top of the first page. It explicitly states that this document does not authorize anyone to make medical or other healthcare related decisions for you. So I will tell you, I've probably encountered confusion, again, as a hospital attorney about this form no less than 3 times a year at all the hospitals I've worked at. Someone arrives asserting they have the right to make medical decisions for a patient. And when staff call me to review the form and the document, it's a statutory durable power of attorney. One situation that stands out in my mind involved that brother and sister. Sister arrived at the hospital first, but ultimately, because she only was granted durable power of attorney by mom, she did not have the ability to make any hospital or healthcare decisions. Brother came later, and he was the one that actually held the medical power of attorney. I'll just say the security had to be called. It was a very contentious situation. So that may be a situation where mom didn't fully understand, or her children didn't fully understand the rights that they had. And lastly, I usually refer these types of forms to my wills and estates attorneys just because of the financial component to it. Next slide, please. So the next form we'll talk about is the out of hospital do not resuscitate D.E.A.R. This is form 4. A quick note, some patients bringing this form to the hospital for a planned procedure actually have the wrong form. And that is because this one is specifically, as it states, for out of hospital D.E.A.R. So what does out of hospital mean? That means if you are, or the patient is in hospice or resident and assisted living. It even entails the emergency room, which is technically considered outside the hospital in some settings under some regulations, and even in an ambulance. So when a patient completes this form, they are stating they do not want emergency personnel or any other healthcare personnel to attempt resuscitation. Remember, we learned about that word earlier. Their wish is to die naturally without intervention. And that said, if the patient is choking or bleeding, the D.E.A.R. order does not apply in those situations because care for those issues are still provided, because that is not resuscitation. So if a patient does not have a D.E.A.R. on file at all, medical professionals and first responders, of course, are legally required to employ life-saving measures in an emergency. So chat time, you ready? So say a patient does not have a D.E.A.R. or do not resuscitate on file. However, medical professionals and first responders at the advanced assisted living actually perform the life-saving techniques. Do you think that they would be liable in any way because they do try to save the patient's life at Shady Pines? Put in the chat. Let's hear what you have to say. So again, the specific life-saving measures covered by this form include cardiopulmonary resuscitation. If you'll go to the next slide. We heard about transcutaneous cardiac pacing, defibrillation, advanced airway management, and artificial ventilation. It's a package deal, folks, and it's all there on the form. And again, because hospice and assisted living patients or residents often have caretakers assisting them before any formal declaration of incapacity, this form includes a space for the adult caretakers, a spouse, etc., adult children, to complete the form on the patient's behalf if needed. I will say, again, the same notary and witness requirements apply. I like this form because they include the definitions on this form there on the right. So next slide, please. Now let's compare that form with the inpatient D.E.A.R. process. Now, there is no official state form in Texas for the inpatient D.E.A.R. because Texas doesn't issue that form. Makes sense, right? Each hospital maintains its own version. So it's completed by the patient at each hospital encounter or each time you're admitted, and expires upon discharge. Because as you can imagine, your wishes about resuscitation may change depending on why you're being admitted to the hospital. So that's why they will ask you each time, do you have a D.E.A.R.? Same revocation rights. You can revoke a D.E.A.R. even if you've been certified unable to make your own medical decisions. You have to be competent to make the D.E.A.R., but not to revoke the DNR. Next slide, please. So under Texas Health and Safety Code, physicians have the authority to issue DNR orders in 4 distinct scenarios. Now, I don't know if you can see all of these scenarios on here, but just imagine that a lot goes on in a hospital. I tell people that hospital dramas make the best television because of things like this. But in 4 distinct scenarios, each with their own legal requirements. When a patient is incapacitated with no known family, no known medical power of attorney, the physician cannot act alone in deciding whether they're not going to resuscitate a patient. It requires written concurrence from a second physician, or the hospital ethics committee is required. If a patient has imminent death, regardless of CPR, the physician may issue on their own a DNR based on medical judgment, but must first notify the patient or the agent if and document that they've actually tried to notify. And that's what I always tell my physician clients. Documentation is key, especially on that. When a patient has a terminal condition, that means, again, expected death within 6 months, an irreversible condition, we learned about those. The physician must certify the diagnosis in writing before any DNR can be entered. So again, very specific situations, depending on the circumstance, regarding the authority of the physician to execute a DNR. So take a look at some of those. In every scenario, the physician is required to document clinical findings, the basis for the DNR order, and all attempts to notify the patient's representative. Of course, failure to do so would remove any legal protections that physician has. So again, a competent patient may revoke the DNR at any time through any means, including verbally. So beyond what we've covered here, unfortunately, there are additional decision frameworks for the very difficult, pretty rare situations you sometimes hear about on the news. Those situations where there's long-term support cases, where there's a conflict between the family wanting the patient to stay on ventilation or the life support machine, and the hospital saying, we can't keep them on the machine anymore. Each one of those carries their own sets of rules. And I've actually, unfortunately, been in the middle of that regarding a child whose Medicaid lapsed during the time he was on the ventilator. So it's important, incredible work in these moments. Next slide. Form 5 is relatively new advance directive. Again, it's for mental health treatment. And don't worry, we are going to have links to all of these Texas form websites in just a few slides. What makes this form unique is its trigger. Now, you do have to be incapacitated, but it's not a physician that decides that. It's actually a court that actually decides that. Texas sets a higher legal bar here because this form addresses more intensive treatment decisions, including what type of psychiatric medications, electroconvulsive therapy, and emergency mental health treatment. So we did not talk about electroconvulsive therapy earlier. So Dr. Powell, what is electroconvulsive therapy?
Yes, so ECT is a treatment that involves putting electrodes on the scalp, and it delivers a controlled electrical stimulus to the brain while the patient is under anesthesia. And this is for severe refractory depression, psychosis, or catatonia.
Got it. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, this form is to be completed while you have full mental capacity. And again, it addresses your preference, just as we said, on the type of psychoactive medications and convulsive therapy, simply whether you consent to have them or not. On the second page, you can list in order the types of other additional treatments or restraints that you'd like to have. And then the next page, or page 3, contains witness limitations that we talked about before, and you can also do a notary. Next slide. So what happens if you don't have any of these forms at all? You just decide not to execute. Well, if you don't complete an NPOA or a living will, in Texas, the law decides in order of priority who gets to make your medical decisions. In order of priority is the spouse, adult children, parents, your nearest living relative, and that's it. It used to be a much longer list. They pared it down within the last 10 years. If no authorized surrogate is available, medical judgment governs, or an ethics committee again provides guidance. And by the way, shout out to all the ethics committees out there. That is a 24-hour on-call service of the hospital. So one more important reminder: in an emergency situation, emergency medical staff in Texas are legally required to default to what we call full code, meaning they will use all aggressive life-saving measures unless an advance directive is known and accessible, and of course says something to the contrary. So that's another compelling reason to complete these documents and make sure the right people have the copies. Next slide. Very quickly, we'll look at this HIPAA release of information form. Highlights about the form: you don't have to be incapacitated. You can name whoever you want to access your medical information. And again, this is pretty routine when you go for your doctor's visits or when you go to a hospital. Next slide, please. It allows you to free form who you want to be able to have access to your medical information. And that allows the medical facility, the doctor's office, to freely disclose to those people. You can even decide how long you want those disclosures to occur. So you can put a date to stop those disclosures. Next slide, please. And while we're on the subject, before we go on, if I'm ever retained on a patient matter, even when I'm not, I'm telling you all here tonight, the first thing I advise is to make sure you have access to your own medical records. Dr. Powell will tell you that the patient portal is the way to go. And as mentioned earlier, the portal is also a great place to upload your advance directives so they are accessible. So here's your action plan. We've reached the conclusion. Here's what we'd love for you to do this week. Review your state's advance directive forms. Now, in Texas, they're available through the Health and Human Services Commission. For other states, you need to check your health department's website or a website that ends in .gov. Talk with your family about your wishes and choose your agent. Schedule an appointment to discuss the living will with your physician, and then actually complete the forms. You can have both an MPOA, a medical power of attorney, we've said this, and a living will, but remember, they can't conflict with one another. Keep copies where you or someone you trust can easily access them. Next slide, please. So in closing, we hope tonight's discussion has empowered you with the confidence to have these conversations with your family and your physician, and to understand the important distinctions between the different types of advance directives. The goal is to do it now, folks, because you must be competent and of sound mind to execute and complete the advance directives. You don't want any drama at the hospital. At minimum, you now understand who and how medical decisions are made absent of an advance directive. All of this is health literacy, and health literacy, especially when it comes to major medical decisions, leads to health equity. But most importantly, it can truly be the difference between life and death. Thank you.
Thank you, Powell, our team. We want to thank you all for listening, audience. You've been amazing. We thank you. Now we're going to let you all in and share some of your questions that our Powell, our team, will answer for you. So, Sora Malan-san, you have the first question. Brenda, you're on mute. Thank you.
What forms are needed for banks versus hospitals? What type of signature authority is required? It seems that bank accounts and IRAs are treated differently in regards to these documents.
That is probably a true statement. And as I mentioned earlier, for a reason, I usually defer filling out the statutory durable power of attorney with the wills and estates attorney. So the bank probably does not care that you are medical power of attorney. The hospital surely does not mind that you are durable power of attorney because that's for financial reasons. So that's the major difference. The hospital looks at the healthcare advance directives, and the banks tend to look at the statutory durable power of attorney.
Thank you.
Florence Robbins will ask the next question.
If a person is mentally able to make decisions and comprehend, but is physically unable to see or sign a medical form, what is the best medical document to use in helping the person during medical discussion?
In the state of Texas, we recognize X as a signature, as a valid signature. There are also instances, it may be more difficult, but maybe if Braille, if there's some type of Braille platform, we also recognize now digital signatures on these advanced directives. So no one should be prevented or have challenges where they can't make their wishes known just because of their inability to see.
Thank you, Attorney Powell. Brenda Melanson, you have the next question.
Is a tattoo of my living will an acceptable legal document?
Wow. Let's see. DNR, that could stand for Donald Nicholas Robertson. So the answer to that is no. A tattoo DNR is not an acceptable way to make your wishes known. As we saw the intricacies of the DNR form, and particularly the intricacies of the physician's authority, then no, a tattoo of Donald Nicholas Robertson will not create a valid DNR.
Thank you, Attorney Powell. Florence Robbins, you have the next question.
If one is separated from spouse, never obtained a divorce, now is in a common law situation, who is considered next of kin? The common law spouse or the spouse he or she never divorced?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So in Texas, there have to be a few things for you to be considered common law. A valid common law is that you're not already married to someone. But the other elements are that you have to agree to be married, you have to share a home, and then hold yourselves out to be married. So it's pretty low standard. Again, the first element is that you can't already be married. So that invalidates the common law. But let me remind you, or not remind you, but make the point is that if you are divorced and you have your ex-husband or ex-wife, your ex-spouse down as your medical power of attorney, that authority is extinguished. So they lose the right to be your medical power of attorney upon divorce. There have been instances, again, security, where there'll be a girlfriend that comes to the hospital of someone, of the husband, and then the wife will show up. I think the question is, who has the legal right? Of course, it's the wife to make medical decisions.
Thank you, Attorney Powell. Very informative. Our next question comes from Florence Robbins.
If there is a centralized register in Texas where advance directive, living wills, and medical power of attorney documents can be filed so that any hospital can access them in an emergency, or is it primarily the individual's responsibility to ensure that medical power of attorney has copies and can provide those documents when needed?
Very good question. So it is always your responsibility. That's why we enjoy doing these, because we need you to understand your rights and what to do to advocate for yourself. And one of those things is to make sure, again, that you upload your documents. Now, with the onset of what we call HIEs, or healthcare exchanges, health information exchanges, there are groups of hospital systems that do share information. For some of you that are on my chart, you have the ability, and Dr. Powell can talk to this, the ability to access patient information across systems or across clinics. And so if you have it uploaded in an HIE type format, and you wouldn't know on the front end, but on the back end where hospitals share that information. Is that right, Dr. Powell?
In certain circumstances, I will say that I have not seen the medical power of attorney or living will from other hospitals in our hospital system. So my recommendation is to always have it on hand and accessible and available because we may be able to, but not all the time.
Thank you both for those answers, our attorney and our medical professions. Brenda Melancon, the next question is yours.
How many alternates can be put on the medical power of attorney?
It's just 2 alternates. And I'll tell you, when I mentioned earlier that has changed, I actually helped Asor, it's been probably 10 years ago, complete her medical power of attorney. And at that time, you could have alternates and co-powers of attorney. So you had a section where people were equal in their decision making, and then it defaulted to the alternates. Can you imagine the good TV drama that probably caused when the 2 MPOAs or the co-agents did not agree on a situation, and it did or did not ever default to the first alternate or the second. So they have totally gotten away with that. It is 2 alternates.
Thank you so much. We're going to have our very last question. We want to thank everyone. So our last question will come from Florence Robbins.
Who serves on the hospital committee?
Which hospital committee?
Is this who serves on the hospital committee? So when you say that the hospital can make a decision, not the doctor, but he goes before a committee to decide if you are able to take them off of life support or whatever, who is
Yes.
actually part of that committee?
Good question. I apologize. So that is the ethics committee. And most hospitals are staffed with ethics committees. These are called medical ethicists, and most are PhDs. It's a rigorous program. And as you can imagine, they have background and coursework in morality as well as clinical processes. So they are usually the ones that we call and they're the ones. I don't talk to patients. They are the ones that usually talk to patients. They are on call, so they are available, as you can imagine, as emergencies arise. And so those are generally they're generally made up of medical ethicists. So they're not necessarily MDs. They could be, but mainly PhDs who have the ability to look at the entirety of the picture. The most memorable time I had to call an ethics committee was a family was disputing whether a patient, their son, had signed an organ donation. And again, this is why you need to talk to your family. That's a type of advance directive we didn't even talk about tonight. But he had signed an organ donation. He was terminal and he was actively dying. So when the parents and the family got to the hospital and the hospital staff explained that he's an organ donor, we're going to, harvest his organs as he transitioned, they went berserk and said he would never do that. In fact, how could he do that? He doesn't even speak English. How could he do that? Well, long story short, we actually had to call the Department of Public Safety, who is linked up with the procurement office. And we found out that he had actually signed the Spanish side of the organ donation card. And so the medical ethics team had to not only have some translators on staff, but the medical ethics had to talk to the family and settle them down and talk about medical wishes. And again, the principal's choice, not the agent's choice for medical treatment. Agent's voice, not the principal's choice. Reverse that. Principal's voice, not the agent's choice. So those are the medical ethics committee.
We want to thank the Powell Power Hour and Apriel Powell. This is a way that you can contact the Powell Power Hour. There's a QR code and there's also a link. We want to thank you all, the audience, for being such an amazing, attentive audience. And we hope that this webinar has helped you gain valuable information, because tonight we knew that your time is very important to you. This additional resource slide, because we promised you that we give you some more resources. So this additional resource slide was going to tell you a little bit about the different states. So this podcast was generated more towards Texas because we are a Texas chapter. But if you look at the different links, there's different states that does different things. So we thank you for that. So on behalf of the Bay Area Houston chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the Delta D.E.A.R.S, we want to thank each of you for taking the time and just listening to the information from our webcast and our host, the Powell, our team. We know that you could have been somewhere else, but yet you chose to spend your time with us, and we thank you. We know that sometimes things could be totally different, but one thing we hope that you've taken away from this podcast, this webinar, is that you have the right and the power to choose in making your own medical decisions known. We hope we have answered your questions, and that you may be walking away from this webinar better than you did when you started it, and with a different perspective on the power that you have and the advocacy that you have to hold and make informed medical and legal decisions for yourselves and especially for your loved ones. So without further ado, we're going to ask you to take a few more minutes to take a picture of this QR code, to tap on that link, and tell us what we've done tonight. And we hope that we've served you all, and it has truly been our pleasure. Again, we thank you, and this concludes our Power to Choose Make Your Medical Wishes Known. Good night, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good night. Thank you from Powell Power Hour.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.